There you go.
Okay, call the meeting of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District Board of Managers open. The first order of business is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve? Well, let me say that. There are a couple of things I would like added to the agenda, or somebody would like to have added to the agenda. Under item number 10, we want to talk about the inspection/maintenance tool examples and adopt the culvert program. Second thing is a definition of native seeding. The third thing is because it doesn't show up anywhere else, is the wetland workshop. And the fourth thing is the ponds of Battle Creek. And the last thing, lost count, is the board closed session. And that'll be under item 10.
That's good.
Anybody else have anything they want to add to the agenda?
No.
Okay. In that case, do I have a motion to accept the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, roll call.
That's right. Pam?
Aye.
Val?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye. Okay, second order of business is recognition of the outgoing
Yeah.
members.
Yeah, so in your packet, I had the certificates and I also had them, they're in certificate holder
Right.
frames there for you as well to proudly hang on your walls if
Thank
you'd
you,
like.
yes.
As you'd like, but I just want to publicly thank you for the time and dedication that you both given to the board. And I mean, I think I told you, you came on at really interesting times for the watershed and helped lead us through this last 6 and 5 years. So we appreciate that. And it's not a small task to be as engaged as you have been. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, it's been it was an interesting decision not to continue on, but first of all, I believe in term limits, so I don't believe in them for myself. The second thing is, when you look, I went back, I was looking for something, and I went back and looked at the old agendas from when we first came on. You could put them on one side of one piece of paper and not get to the bottom. And so the number of projects that have been taken on in the time that we've been on the board is immense. We've nearly doubled the amount of work that we have, which is really good. And we've shifted a lot, as we talked in the last meeting, the Metro Mod. They asked about how prepared we were to be resilient in terms of flooding. And this board is, I mean, we're not done, but we've got stuff in place, including some things in here that put us in really good position. I'm not sure anybody else is in that good of a position, even the folks up north. So it's been fun. It really has. There's going to be a lot of regrets, but still, I think it's the right thing to do.
Well, I have to say what he said, and it was a difficult decision because there's so much going on, and halfway through really the resiliency studies, short-term and long-term goals. A lot of work went into that, and I had a lot of training, which I appreciate, but I kind of hated to leave now. But it is what it is. And just appreciate how patient everyone's been with me, including all of you on Zoom, and all the questions I've asked, and really, really appreciate that. And just, we had a good talk before this meeting about how proud we are of this watershed's work. So I want to just put that on the record.
Exactly. We're on to item number 4, the consent agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to take out of the consent agenda to talk about?
Just to clarify, we can ask questions during discussion, doesn't mean that we have to take it out, correct?
Okay, all right, so do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, discussion.
I am curious, I couldn't connect the dots on what this change order was for. And is it, that it printed funky or I got?
It's not, that's not a change, or it's work that that Gallowitz Olson did regarding a change order. So that's the description of the work. So that's filed under the attorneys, would be under the attorneys.
Oh, it was? It printed with the consent agenda and that's what
Oh,
panicked me.
well, it is
For
as part of the
bills.
bill list. Yeah, it's the
Oh,
last
for
sheet in the
the
bill
list.
list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you're good. I was trying to connect the dots on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I just had a question, maybe for Paige. On the Owasso Heights Townhomes, this was an association making the application. And have we seen that very often? I know we have some, but sometimes we have individual townhomes.
Mhm.
Tina's nodding her head yes, so that
Yeah.
answers that question. But we're always looking for more places for outreach, and I think a project like this that involves this sort of extended project is a good example to do maybe some more outreach to the townhome associations.
Mhm.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, so we have done quite a few townhome projects. They're difficult, but I think what I've found is if we can get in with a management company. So we've worked with like Keller Properties manages, oh gosh, I think we've done 5 or 6 projects around our district that are on properties they manage. So they're aware of our grant programs and what is available and how we can help solve, drainage issues. And a lot of residents are now, they're more aware of the need to get away from just regular turf grass and shut off their irrigation systems. So we've seen some more interest in that regard where the residents are pushing their boards and getting the management companies on board too. But yeah, definitely a good idea for outreach. For future projects.
Thanks.
Any other discussion? Okay, roll call.
Pam? Aye. Val?
Aye.
Matt? Diane?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye. Item number 5 is visitor comments. I don't believe we have any unrecognized visitors here, but any comments? Okay. Now we get to the permit program. So item number capital I on the permit program is 2302. Discussion on that.
Yeah, and I can kick it off if you want, or yeah, I can take questions first, whatever you prefer.
After you, Nicole. I'm sure you'll.
Okay.
clarify it.
Sure. So yeah, I just want to preface this by saying each project this month had a variance request, which is unusual, but we reviewed them all individually, and I'll be happy to step through these projects with you. Starting with 2302, as you mentioned, Coretta Assisted Living is a proposed assisted living facility in Maplewood near County Road C and White Bear Avenue. They are meeting stormwater requirements with underground filtration. They are meeting floodplain storage requirements. There were wetlands delineated on site, and the variance that's being requested is twofold. On the west side, in the wetland buffer, they are abandoning an existing stormwater pipe. So they're going to get in there and block it off. And then on the southeast side, putting in a new pipe. And that would be draining from the parking lot. So the proposed final condition would be that they're meeting our buffer requirements. So I can take any questions that you have on that. So just to clarify, it's a temporary disturbance of the wetland buffer.
Nicole, I wondered if in the variance letter by Mr. Bull, if that second paragraph from the bottom, that the city and the county are going to develop the storm sewer route that limits the overall wetland disturbance, yada, yada, if that should be in the special provisions, if they do that.
I think that's a past tense that they did,
Okay, so they're done.
that they have. that they have minimized the disturbance to the best of their
Okay.
ability. Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Other discussion?
She answered my question.
Did I get a motion? I don't think I did. No. Okay, so do I have a motion to accept 2302?
I'll move to approval of the permit with special provisions variance request.
Second. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Pam, Val,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Get to permit number 2303. So,
Yeah, this is a Ramsey County led project to reconstruct Hodgson Road. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this stretch. It's currently a rural ditch section, and they're proposing to reconstruct it from about Rice Street to Highway 96. So they'd be adding curb and gutter and storm sewer. And then also pedestrian and bicycle friendly facilities, sidewalk and a trail. They are proposing to meet stormwater treatment requirements, actually exceed our requirements with infiltration above and below ground. There's 4 different locations that they're proposing to do that. They have met our floodplain storage requirements. They've actually created additional storage, which, as we all know in this area, is a great thing to hear. The variance request is similar to the last project, and it's for storm sewer pipe. And that would be coming from a new proposed infiltration basin towards the north end of the corridor. So again, it's just a temporary disturbance, and then I can take any questions that you have.
So I'm trying a new medium in terms of taking notes, and I realized I wrote my general question on the second permit, so I apologize. I was curious, Nicole, in your experience, because just looking at each of these asking for a temporary disturbance, do we have an understanding of when we would deem something like a permanent disturbance, or if there's been any transitions to permanent disturbances from the temporary, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, if they were requesting a new variance, like after the project was approved, it would have to come back to you
Okay,
for
okay.
approval.
I was just curious because it was just a trend of boom, 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 and
Yeah.
I think that's because the last remaining lands to be developed in our watershed district all have buffers around them. that they have to deal with.
Wetlands, yeah.
It's just so sad to see the last little bits of green land going.
Yeah, well, in this case, it will remain, it's
Yeah,
just.
the one before though,
Yeah.
I see, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a lot of storm sewer routing, and then in the last or second to last project we'll talk about, it's for future flood improvement. So it's all, yeah, related to routing water. So it's difficult to do that without disturbing a great width next to the receiving water body.
And follow-up question, if this does become like the trend Pam highlighted, more common, are there new thresholds we should set where the board doesn't have to look at a temporary disturbance for the future?
Well, it's all wrapped into the permit, so you would see the permit anyway. It's just,
That's
I mean, the variance maybe, if you
Yeah, if
wanted
there
to
was a
take it
variance.
off of the variance list requirements.
I don't think I want to, I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, that's something we could talk about if the board is willing. I do think it takes some applicants by surprise when they're having to develop these variance requests for just temporary disturbance, but I kind of can see both sides of it. It helps hold them accountable too with the restoration plans that they're providing. So yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. They're planning on digging a pond up on the north end of Hodgson. Where does the water that's going to go into that pond go now? Because here's the concern. They're gonna build, at least as I understand it, so if I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong. They're gonna build a pond to dump water into to hold it. It's gonna go, I would presume, infiltrate into wetland A. Wetland A has already got a pretty high water table, so it very possible the pond will just fill up. But it also is slow draining. We know that, it has no outlet to it. So here again, you're dumping more water into Wetland Bay. If that's not true, you can tell me. I'm
Well,
just-
the more part isn't true.
so- Well,
Yeah.
but right now, if everybody recalls, about 4 or 5 years ago, John Owanagi wrote a letter to the watershed board saying, gee, water is shooting out under Snail Lake Road out of that little culvert that's in there and eroding this, and our walkways are falling away and things like that. My question is, when you put this in, and you're gonna put a drain pipe into it, is this gonna exacerbate that problem? Because there's a little stream that runs through there. There is a stream that goes by the, what do they call it? The old folks home now. Sorry.
Scandia Shores.
Scandia Shores, thank you.
Mhm.
That is that where the water would normally come from that they're putting in this pond? In other words, are we making the situation worse in Wetland A by doing this than it is now, or are we making it better?
We're making it better
So,
because of our rules.
yeah.
Go ahead.
and
Nicole.
I'm happy to report that unlike a lot of other projects that we see, this project is actually not only reducing runoff rates, they're reducing overall volume, which is a really tall task for a project of this scale. And that's because they're treating so much with these really large facilities. So
So between the
should be both though.
infiltration and the ponding, less water will be going to Wetland A than is right now.
Yes.
That was my primary question. What about the rest of us? Where's the water going from the ditches and everything that's coming out of there? Is it going into Grass Lake? Is it going to West Vadnais Lake, or where's it going?
Yeah, so it's all in the greater Grass Lake major subwatershed. Excuse me, but that's the same for all the minor subwatersheds and drainage areas on the project. They've quantified runoff rates for each of those, so they're all decreasing.
Oh, decreasing, okay. Because part of the reason for asking too is at some point you'll probably get a request for a permit for the little undeveloped area across from the strip mall on Ramsey, which they already presented to the Shoreview City Council and got a little pushback on. But okay, part of that is that was originally designed to be individual houses, which meant lawns and places to get rid of water. Now it's going to be basically paved over. And is that what I'm concerned with is that as they do these things, they're just going to force more water into Grass Lake. And if you are, how are you going to get it out?
So that's why we have our rules. And so our rules require that they have to match both rate and they have to do volume control. So they need to treat that water, either infiltrate it or release it at a similar rate that it currently is. So that's exactly why we have our rules, so that
Okay,
they don't make the situation worse. It can only be better.
okay. All right. So the
And in
reason,
this case, the county's doing one better and reducing volume, which is above and beyond, like overall volume from existing conditions, which is above and beyond what our rules require. So we were happy to see the design submittal when it came in.
Nicole, is it for the whole strip or just the north end? This permit?
The whole corridor, the whole project area.
Because at the residents meeting, the county engineer, when talking about the south end, thought the water was going into Wetland A and didn't understand there was no outlet. So you're satisfied that this is not going to increase the water into Wetland A?
Yes.
we trust you. Okay, all right. Any other discussion? Okay, do I have a motion to approve permit number 2303? So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, roll call.
Pam?
Aye.
Val?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
And Larry?
You. Thank you all. I'll sleep better than that. Okay, now we have permit 2304.
Yeah,
Which I thought they weren't going to call themselves Dunkin'
Yeah,
Donuts
it's just
anymore.
Duncan, right?
It's just Dunkin'.
oh, that might have been my assumption, or it was on the permit application. I wasn't aware. Yeah, so this is an existing strip mall in North St. Paul, north of Highway 36. This is a relatively small site, but triggers our permit because of floodplain issues. So they have demonstrated that they're meeting our floodplain storage requirements with their cut and fill calculations. However, the existing strip mall, which they're proposing to redevelop and use the same building, in existing conditions does not meet the district's freeboard requirements from the adjacent pond. So they're a little over a foot above the 100-year water surface elevation of that pond, when our rules typically would require 2 feet. So in order to use the building for their business, they're proposing, I think it's like a 5-foot bump out so that they can do their drive-through. So it doesn't meet it in existing conditions, doesn't meet freeboard and proposed conditions, but they're not changing the separation. They're not worsening the flood protection that's there. So that's why staff felt comfortable.
This is like when we approved the permit for the window place. Same.
I immediately, yeah, thought of that
Yeah.
project,
So-
and in that case,
Okay.
yeah, it
Except for
was
this one
actually,
approved flood stage, but not by 2 feet.
yes,
Exactly, yep.
yeah,
So that one was below flood stage, but.
right.
So as long as they know that,
Mhm.
I think that's what we really need to know to move ahead with this. That's my opinion.
Yep.
Okay, any other discussion before we, do I have a motion to approve 2304?
I had a quick question. I'm trying to find it on Google Maps, but is that location, was it a gas station before? Or am I just
Yes.
remembering off?
I think
And
it
so there's
is. I
no
think it-
problem with gas tanks underneath the ground or anything like that to consider?
Not that I'm aware of. We do look at that when they're proposing stormwater infiltration specifically, but they aren't required to treat stormwater because they have such a small disturbance area. I'm not aware if and when the tanks would have been removed. I would assume they've been removed, but I guess I am not 100% sure.
Okay, thanks.
I did have one question, and this is just curiosity. Does anyone know if that site's reported pooling water or anything like that that would raise concern?
I don't know, but maybe I think Brad or whoever from Bar is pretty familiar with PCU Pond and flood trends, but
The
I'm
best of
not
my
aware.
knowledge, there's not cooling of water in that parking lot or around there, and as Nicole presented, it is above the 100-year floodplain, it just doesn't meet the freeboards, it is still set up quite a ways. So, but I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it was just a curiosity thing.
Brad, I didn't know you were in the room. I was looking at your
That's
other.
fair.
Yes, I can't see you.
Great.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve 2304?
So moved.
It's
Second, okay, any further discussion? Roll call.
Pam, aye. Val.
Aye.
Matt, Larry, or Diane,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Okay, good. Now we have permit number 2304. By the way, I kind of like doing this. I missed having the discussions over the permits when we just looked through them and went ahead. So thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. It's a marathon session.
Yeah,
2305 is a MidNOT project to do maintenance on I-94, starting at Century Avenue and moving east. So part of it's actually out of our watershed district. So we were just kind of reviewing the part that's in our watershed and drains back to our watershed. So A lot of it's not fully reconstructed. It would be a pavement rehabilitation. Although they're making some safety improvements and doing some grading and storm sewer work in particular spots. So they are disturbing over an acre. For that reason, they're doing permanent stormwater treatment in the form of filtration. And then the board might remember a discussion. I don't remember what month that it would have been last year, but discussing adding partially funding a secondary pipe under I-94 to Battle Creek Lake for potential flood improvements to that area. We knew that MnDOT was coming in and tearing up pavement here, so the board elected to provide funding because it would be a way bigger project if the watershed were to come in and do it later. So that's included in this permit submittal, and that's part of the reason for the variance request for temporary upland buffer disturbance on the north side of Battle Creek Lake. And these pipes are connecting essentially the Tanner's Lake across to Battle Creek Lake. So I can take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we're concerned about the salt in the lakes and particularly Battle Creek Lake. Is there an opportunity here to collaborate, to put something in to collect salt from the freeway to prevent it from getting into Battle Creek Lake? Possibly.
Honestly, I don't know that we have the technology to even be able to do that, to collect it. I mean, good news is that MnDOT is the most highly trained salt applicators in the state, and they have already decreased their use of salt tremendously over the last 10 years. It becomes soluble as soon as it gets in that.
I know, I'm just
water
thinking like
system, so,
Brad's group could come up with some creative diversions, envisioning some like barriers that drain to someplace far away from the lake and then it has to hit the ground before it, but yeah. So I'll take that as a no.
Yeah.
I think it's probably
I mean,
out of scope for this project too, but.
Yeah, our infiltration and filtration requirements get at that too, because permanent treatment does remove some salt in the filter media. And this does have filtration proposed in 3 different locations. But yeah, I would just echo what Tina said. I think if it were that easy, I'm sure a lot of people would be doing it already.
Yeah.
A subsequent question on the parallel pipe that's plugged. I remember the conversations about that. Did we conclude with figuring out when we would use that, or is that just for future expansion only?
Future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just in case.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember if we said, hey, this is when we would unplug it, or not.
So somebody in the future wouldn't say, why didn't those people?
Yeah,
do that?"
no, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
I will say that in that board packet is a scope summary that
Yeah.
talks about the resiliency study that will happen for the
With the-
non-beltline.
This
And that will be wrapped into that study as
Okay.
if and when we can use it and how that might be incorporated. Okay. Yeah. good question.
And as I said, I feel like I'm leaving with stuff half done and thinking of the new board members that might be helpful as part of the orientation. To not just throw all the paper at them, but here's the Beltline studies and the pieces that have been done already. that
Yeah,
could
we'll
be
definitely
kind
be
of
doing that.
narrowed down a bit because all of us were here, remember it, and then we had to decide, do we want to go ahead with the bigger pipe than we need now or not? And we definitely did. And remember the descriptions of the area around there. So that's not as important in this case, but it's going to be for some of the bigger projects to have so I'm just thinking if there's a way to provide context
Yeah, for sure.
without the hours.
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll use the story map to walk
Yeah.
through those things. Yeah.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve 2305, permit 2305?
So
So- Second. Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Okay, Pam, right, Sal,
Aye.
Matt, Diane,
I
and Larry.
Aye. Then we have 2306. Any discussion on that? Excel Energy rebuilding their lines. What are the mats they're going to use in the wetlands? How does that work?
Yeah, so as far as I know, if they're approved tonight, and I'm not sure what other approvals they might need from the city, they want to get going on this project soon. Typically accessing wetlands in the winter when the ground is frozen is a less destructive activity. The mats that they use are these big, I don't know if it's plastic or rubber, but they're these big mats that they can drive equipment over so that they're not making ruts in the dirt and destroying all the vegetation underneath. So it's an attempt to minimize disturbance in the wetland and other upland adjacent areas.
Okay, thank you. No further discussion. Do I have a motion to approve 2306?
Move to approve 2306.
Second,
Okay, any further discussion? Roll call.
Pam, hi, Val.
Aye.
Matt, Diane,
aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Okay. And the enforcement action report.
Yeah, it continues to be kind of quiet on the construction front due to the winter, but you'll see Mary did some inspections mid-January when we had a brief thaw. So if there are any questions for me or her, feel free to ask.
I thought it was really interesting that you caught them piling snow into a retention basis and had to explain to them, which I never would have thought about. But that'll screw up the way the retention base works. And so good for you. Congratulations.
Good catch.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to make my rounds to all the sites that I know have basins in the winter just to make sure they're storing snow properly. So they don't have question marks in the spring of what the heck happened to their basin.
Yeah. Why isn't the water drained?
Yeah.
And this year it's more of a job than a.
Yeah, for sure.
Looking for places to put them. Okay. Good
I-
job.
I was curious about the winter construction inspection presentation. How was that?
Yeah, with Dwayne Stenland. Yeah, that was really informative. They have pretty strict, I guess, guidelines at MnDOT of how often they should be inspecting in winter. And all of my active construction sites, they have to keep doing their weekly inspections if they're active, and that even includes if they're just painting the interior of a building. And that's because the people that are showing up to do the interior work are driving in and out of the site, and that could cause tracking if it's warm enough outside and things like that. So that was really informative. And it was great just to hear from other inspectors throughout the state of what kind of their winter inspections look like.
Oh, that's cool.
Plus Dwayne Stemlin is a dynamic presenter. He's been around a long time and he's
Very lively presentation.
Yeah.
Very passionate.
Okay, anything else there? Item number 7, stewardship grant program. I have one question. In the January packet, the budget for the stewardship grant program is $8 million. February packet, it's $1,128,000. I don't think the board authorized. We said they could set aside $128,000 for the LEAF program.
Yeah.
Which gets back to my comment before that probably needs its own budget. But did the board authorize directly that would be $1.128
Yeah.
million?
So in the budget approval in December, I added the carryover because you had indicated that carryover could be added to the budget. So that 128,000 was the
So it should have
carryover.
shown up in the January.
So we
Oh, I
had-
thought
we
it
had-
wasn't.
we
I
had-
understand that, just
Oh.
trying to make sure that.
Yeah, I thought I had changed it, so it was that way in the January
No, I
packet.
found it. It
Yeah,
wasn't
I
in-
think it was.
It wasn't in the packet that's online. It
Oh,
was
you know
in the
what?
Packet that was
That you
printed.
received, yes.
Yes.
So it didn't get the updated packet, didn't get in the, interesting.
Well,
Okay.
there's some paying attention to details there, Larry.
Oh, yeah, well, that's why. I'm here.
But it was indicated in our budget spreadsheet as well. So-
Yeah.
Well, I'll just see who he delegates that job.
Yeah. Cliff was the one that always used to go through the drill list, one line by line. I kind of felt an obligation to take up his responsibilities. Okay, anything else on that? Action items done, that's good. Attorney report. There's Tracy. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, you guys. I had a trouble signing in, it's like my first time in 3 years. I've only been doing this every month, but Diane and Larry, you're going to be missed. Thank you so much for your time and your care and your passion for this board. It's been an honor serving for you. So I wish you well. I know you have good personal reasons for that, but thank you for giving me an opportunity to serve with you.
And thank you for all your help.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. So I wish you both well. This month we had a few things going on. We looked at the BMP maintenance program request for proposal. Paige presented that to me and we reviewed that. I think it looks good. We looked at the rule modification. I went through the rules as they're proposed to be modified. Really, they look great. They're more technical than legal in my mind. So I did have a chance to go through that and we can go through the timing of when and how that gets served and the notice once they're in final form. And then we did look at the Jarvis Pond for permit for access so that we can continue to have access through that area. And we reviewed that as well. So pretty active month from my end.
Plus you're doing double duty, right, with Lauren?
Well, yeah, you guys are seeing a little slower response. Thank you for your
Oh, yeah.
patience. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't really say much when it's your own daughter on maternity leave. No. And they just asked me about the baby. It's my grandson. No. So thank you. That's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we have board issues, policies and operations. First item, we've added some things to that.
Mhm.
Again, this is where we kind of bring things up to the future. And you can do whatever you want with it, because this will be it for me. The board action log, any additions or subtractions or anything for that anyone wants? It's getting to be quite long.
Well,
It's
you
probably good.
brought up the ones that I wanted to ask questions about, so I'll wait.
Okay. All right, and some of the things that I added to it, just a quick explanation. On the maintenance tool, you sent out the pictures of some of the areas on there. And I put in there adopt a culvert program, which is kind of like adopt a drain program, except for on a culvert. Now, I would guess that there are liabilities with having individual citizens go out and dig in culverts. But the idea is when I looked through the assessments that were done, there were a lot of weeds and stuff in front of the culverts, and that's got to affect the flow. Why didn't those show up better? I looked at the numbers that came out and it's like, okay, you could have a total of 8. Some of these were 4 and 5, and you can explain this to me too. And they were normalized to 1. What does that mean? Let's start with
Well, first of all, I'm not
the right person.
the right person to speak specifically to your question, but I can talk about the culvert,
Right.
The idea of having some weeds on a culvert doesn't necessarily always restrict the flow, because a lot of times the size of the culvert isn't necessarily dictating, the inlet size isn't dictating how much flow can get through. Sometimes it's the downstream end that's restricting the flow. Other times you have a bigger inlet, which allows some plugging or some coverage of those weeds when the actual pipe diameter is what controls. So it varies there. So that may have been the interpretation of the inspector when they looked at it. It's like, the what we would call the apron or the flared end accepts a lot more water than the actual pipe for that reason. It holds the banks back, but it also allows some plugging and some debris to accumulate there. So that may have been the reason for the scoring.
That, and also with this, if there's any sort of small blockages that like our maintenance staff or our water quality staff could do, that would rate out as a 0 because we could grade that ourselves. Whereas this is more of a structural deal for the CIP inspections. Is the inlet intact? Is it there? Is the end falling off? Is a pipe injured? Whereas if we can handle this internally, we'll go attack that ourselves.
The normalization, we came up actually, I think, a couple of times. And so I was trying to go back and revisit why, because it was the cumulative normalization, right? I still have a hard time connecting some of the higher numbers to the one, frankly. In this particular case, I think I've asked Brad and some others enough times to understand the culvert, the grass one, but like silt and the blockage there. I also was concerned, but just understanding the normalization, I think is really would help some of that.
I'll ask Tyler, we can
Yeah.
ask Tyler to give more explanation for that in the next packet so that you can.
That would be
how
nice.
it works.
I had a write up because Larry and
Yeah.
I share a similar concern
Yeah.
because there were some definitely high flyers. I was like, oh, and going on the trip with Dave, I know some of them he'd just take care of, but the other ones I didn't.
Well, maybe that would be something that should be included in the inspection report, is that we're taking care of it. It's graded this because we're going to maintain it ourselves and not make it a capital improvement project. I had a question, Dave. The outlet of Grass Lake wasn't in the list. There's 2 24-inch corrugated metal pipes that are the actual outlet now that it's seeped and the ends are bent up, so it can't drain. So what do you do?
The ones underneath the railroad tracks you're talking about?
No, the
those-
ones that are southwest of the 0617G. The ones that the water from Grass Lake, which would be the first thing they go through.
You're talking about the
Under-
new ones? that we
Through the
put
No,
out?
the old ones.
You're talking about the ones through the path and not the ones down.
Yeah, they're the ones that will end up getting water under the berm that's created by the sewer line. So Grass Lake hasn't been draining at all.
So I think Brandon, we talked with
Right.
Brandon about that, and it has a different path, so it comes around and through and then under the path. So it can still get to the under the path pipes.
Oh.
But I'm not
But she-
Under-
Yeah, if I'm understanding
Under
correctly, it
the
actually
path
flows
pipes.
to the south and around and then works its way to the pipes that are in the path.
The new ones.
So
that
that
are put in.
it's not a direct route, but it does, and with it flowing so slowly in Grass Lake, that is not a restriction.
On
But I
that,
can check on that just to
yeah,
make sure.
just because I know what you mean, but if those were open, there would be more flow. And Grass Lake, it just hasn't had any flow and it's still above normal, it seems like. But I think that's a good point with what we're talking about, that it would be helpful to know the normalization. It would be helpful to know if staff are taking care of it. And you've got on the form who owns it, but who's responsible for maintaining it? Because I think you were turning some over to Ramsey County to maintain. That would be good to add to your form. And I remember when we reviewed the tool and we made some suggestions, I'm not sure we ever saw the final one back. So that'd be good to give your new people the tool. So when you're reporting on your CIP recommendations, or have them look at it. I'm wondering if in an area like Grass Lake, and we know we mean broader from Snail down to Vandas, if there should be a policy that those areas that have been flooded get more frequent inspections and maybe a higher level of optimizing flow than what we're normally okay with. So it's something to consider for future policies. Some other issues around it, and I had the same questions about normalization, so it sounds like you'll continue into that.
Yep.
But that area hasn't been flowing optimally. It's still got too much water, so it's questions if
I think
Yeah,
grass
we're
has been
okay with
below
that.
the normal, below the outlet elevation all this last year, as far as
Yeah, this year's could very well be different.
Yeah.
well, yeah, this coming year, but I'm saying in in this past year, I think it's been below the outlet elevation, so it hasn't been able
It's
to.
hard to tell. I mean, I ball it because we don't have a staff cage.
Right.
So that'd be great.
I have a request, I don't know how, to phrase it, but I have sometimes have concerns with safety of some, like I have reported to you, like whenever it storms near my house on Century Avenue and 10th Street, just next to the Safeway or the gas station there, it used to be a SA, whatever it is now. The water, when there's high water, when it's raining, the flow is so great that to me, every time I pass it, I think it's a death trap. And I'm really concerned that this is a dangerous situation here. So I'm wondering if there's maybe something the watershed could do to evaluate safety on some of these sites as needed and report back about what you found. And I don't even know if that's, and I'm not sure if this is a reasonable request, because I don't even know if this site that I think is unsafe has anything to do with their watershed district. It might just be like Oakdale's conveyance. It's dangerous.
Most of it would be, right, local responsibility, either city or county.
But is that something we could evaluate and say, Oakdale, this looks like it's really dangerous and maybe you want to look at, I don't know, is that something that the watershed district could conceivably do?
I think it might be hard to determine the danger factor, how to determine what's dangerous. Or
If
what
a
could
person
even
was walking
be done
and the
about
water
it.
just picked them up and killed them. I mean, look,
Well, I
to
mean,
me, I
that
can
can
look at it,
happen,
it's
but
dangerous.
that's based on the flood event, right? So I don't know, and we need the system, the conveyance system to manage the flood event, so I'm not sure how we would, or maybe you have some
No,
suggestions.
not much else than that, but one of the things we always look at are the slopes going down to where the water's flowing, because if somebody does get close, they're curious about what's going on. The steeper the slope, obviously, the higher the risk of losing the footing and actually falling into the flow. But I mean, that's embedded in our rules as well. When you have a problem and it's around the water body, the 3 or 4 to 1 slope, depending on the situation, is something that we look for in the permit. But I guess, more to your point, we don't go out and really look at things that aren't part of a permit program to identify a
Or even
safety
our own
issue.
project, because you do the safety audits on our own projects
On
as
our own
well.
project.
Yeah.
Well, it's just too now with our storms being more infrequent and in greater amounts. It's happening more frequently and this is like mood about the slopes because the water overflows the slopes. I mean, it's the ditch is full and it's pouring everywhere. So that's my concern and I don't know if there's any.
I think if there's, particular cases like the one you had sent me, I think, connecting with the city and the county on that.
So anyway, the concept again about the adopted culvert program that fits in with this is to have a really transparent, easy to find way for citizen observers to let us know when something's going on. I'm sure positive we're gonna run into this spring, when all this snow that we've packed up and refused to get rid of starts to melt. And people are gonna be wondering where to go. It still isn't that easy, to your point, for me to find out where to go to complain when I look at the at the website. So the adopted culvert program is not about people digging out culverts. It's about reporting when there are issues that we may want
It's
to look at.
like a culvert watch.
I think what I can do is have Lauren maybe highlight so it's on the contact us page, it's report a problem. So, I mean-
Look there.
Well, under contact us, I mean, that is one of our most visited sites is the contact us page, so I don't think it's hard for people to find a way to get a hold of us per se. But she could highlight that as a way for people to do that.
I do
Well,
like,
there
As
is
a
a report an
communications.
issue spot here. Look at
Yeah.
that. Huh.
I do like the idea of culvert watch, because I know some of my neighbors or covert alert or whatever you want to.
Right.
But I remember contacting the first folks that people typically contact the city.
Mhm,
So a
yep.
lot of the neighbors that I've met contact the city, but if that's something that we can help or maybe build a pipeline to the proper authorities.
I mean, I was gonna say, I want to make sure that, you know that we wouldn't be the one to respond to all the issues, because we would require the cities and the county
Right.
to, take care of that situation. in
We've
those
seen
cases.
volleyballs and stuff blocking.
Yeah,
Frisbees.
Yeah.
yeah,
But now you know where to
I
report.
homes.
yeah.
I just walk out and pick it up, but yeah.
Or that.
We do carefully, safely.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
the next thing is native seeding, and it's just a comment, it's something that maybe would be on a future agenda. Because every time we have disturbances, they do native seeding.
Mhm.
And I think it would be helpful for the board, to be interesting for me, to see how you determine what it is you seed in there compared to what was already there.
Yeah,
How that's
there's,
determined.
so how that's looked at is there's seed mixes that MnDOT certifies as native seed
Right.
mixes, and so they use them. They're not matching necessarily what's there to what they put back. We just do require that the seeding that they do is all a native
A
mix
native
and
stuff,
not
yeah.
non-native,
And
so,
I figured that out,
yeah.
but I, is it just like you get a bag of stuff and every time you dig something up, you put seeds down from that bag? Or do you try to determine what was already there and match it up better with how it would be compatible with the materials that were already in place?
For the permit cases, like you saw today, it would be a seed mix that they would use. They would not try and match something,
Try to
but
match it.
when we do our own CIP projects, our staff work really closely with the contractor to provide a seed mix that we think is acceptable, and it's could be different per site.
Yeah, and that
depending on
may
the
be
things.
actually a way to handle it, is to put, I've always wanted to put more of our best practices where somebody can easily find them on the website.
Mhm,
That may be something that you tell people, hey, look, go and look how we do it. We
mhm.
would like you to do it the same way, instead of just, and I know there'll be pushback and there's nothing we can do about it, but at least we give them a place to go.
Yeah.
Same thing when I was going back and trying to look for some information on the technical reports that have been done over the years. And we need a place to have those too, so, if we're gonna talk about these things, one of them was cart barriers.
Mhm.
And, if somebody's working on that, I've got a little thing here on cart barriers. That's a good reference point for people to come and start to look at the website to find information that they probably really would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, when we have technical information like the cart barriers or even the seed mixes, I mean, we answer those questions more, not from the website, but from our interactions with them typically. But yeah, it's always good to have
get in?
inclusive. I think that's the ice maker.
Oh.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I heard it too.
it's like back in my
It should be.
maker at home, it's the same way. and I-
Yeah.
Who's breaking it? Why isn't it all barking?
Great.
Larry, if you want an example of what our CIP looks like, it's in the education room right now. And then I go out with our NR team beforehand and say, hey, this is what we got. What seed mix works best for this? And then each one of those packets that are in there, you can see the full list of, 30 to 40 different species on each one. And then the grass and oats and stuff like that we put out there. So when we do our stuff, we do a pre-visit, see what's there, see what the best mix is for that area, upland, wetland. And then I work with our NR, they give me the seed, and then we go from there.
And there has been a few cases too where permit applicants or maybe cost share, well, for sure cost share, but they'll ask, for a guidance on that, and we can
Right.
help provide that.
Maybe this is warranting Bill to publish another book about the proper planting or what plants go where.
Yeah,
Another failing guide.
something else for Bill to do. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought you had brought that up in reference to the edible plant conversation that's later on.
right.
That's what I was waiting on, but I can wait. I can wait for the
Okay,
question.
sounds good. Brought up the wetland workshop.
Yes,
Where do we stand with that?
we don't have a date. The 16th did not work for either of our new board members, and the 22nd didn't work for Pam. So if I remember the dates right, I believe those were the dates. So that's where we're at. I just don't know how else to, I guess, other than inviting you just to come back when we do it,
letting us talk.
when we find a date that can work. And unless you want to try a different date or really,
Well, I'm not good, but I just wondered what was going on. I also noticed that's the last day of the mod, or one.
yeah,
One.
yeah, Minnesota watershed.
One.
Legislative days,
Yeah,
yeah. There's not a lot that happens on that Thursday as a group for that legislative days, but
all right, well, when you do figure it out, I'd love to come.
yes,
participate.
absolutely,
So, as long
absolutely.
as I can talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'll be up to the board. Just kidding.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yes.
Okay, Ponds of Battle Creek.
Yes.
There's no report on that. I know that we talked about, we're working on a proposal for a policy, thank you,
Mhm.
about land purchase, but doesn't necessarily involve. Is this something that is really viable, or are we just chasing butterflies?
I think, as I've said, I think last month or maybe the month before, I don't know that the purchase of that property is something that is gonna happen, honestly, but I think our coordination and work with the county to make sure that whoever does purchase, that there is protections for the native, for the wetlands and the buffers in that area.
Is there any interaction with NGOs or something that would be interested in buying that instead of us, if we, agreed to help them manage it?
I mean, I just haven't explored that to that extent, but I'm not getting the sense from Ramsey County that that's of interest. But conservation easements were something that they were interested in. So,
Okay,
So you think they want more tax base out of it?
yes.
Well, even part of it, it's a really big parcel. So the idea
Yeah.
of, getting nature conservancy, and there's just
Yeah.
so many environmental agencies around that you could pull money and buy part of it.
Could you help me remember when this came up previously?
yeah.
The name is
it was
super
right after
familiar.
Cliff left the board. He left us with a challenge that he read about, and it's actually appeared in at least the Star Tribune a few times, about this property that used to be a golf course. And it was run by Ramsey County, and they kind of abandoned their interest in it as a golf course. And then the question is, what are they gonna do with it? And apparently we invested in this a while ago, not to buy it, but
Habitat
done some
restoration work, yeah.
habitat
Mhm.
thing, work on it. And so the concern that he reflected was, is this something we want to look at, trying to keep the wetlands viable as wetlands, or just let them pave over it again and put up more apartment buildings?
Would this have any tie-in to we had talked about targeted areas for wetlands, the first workshop we did, is probably when I remember it.
To me, it should be, yeah. There's that's kind of my opinion on it too, is that we're going out and looking for places. We did a great big study on that, desktop study, to see where there are places that we could do wetlands. None of them were viable for meeting the requirements for purchase wetlands, whatever. But
For
this one
banking.
would fall into that same category. I don't know if it was looked at in that study or not.
So that study
I don't
was looking
remember.
at previously drained wetlands
Yeah.
or areas that had been wetland previously drained. This area has a number of wetlands on it. It doesn't have, I would say, locations that were previously drained. It was
I was
built as
curious.
a golf course around the wetland system, so.
It sounds super familiar. I was just
Like
trying to connect it with
restoration.
some of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we, over the years, our team has done a lot of buffer and habitat restoration work in the site.
Well, the fight still goes on, because I had an article about 3 or 4 weeks ago on Star Tribune.
Yeah.
About people trying to keep it the way it was, basically, so, you know. Opinion is anything we can do to help that would be beneficial. It's a good thing to do. We shouldn't be losing wetlands. As Pam says, all
No,
the
we
wetlands are gonna
won't,
be up
yeah.
north after a while if we're not careful,
Mhm.
but just keep in contact with them. It's-
Yeah, and I'll make sure I get it on my ongoing project list too. I forgot to add it this time again.
The final item then
Oh.
is the closed session.
Sure. This evening at 5, we met in the closed session to do the administrator's performance review and salary adjustment. So just making a record of that.
Report of the meeting.
Mhm.
That brings us to item number 11.
Yes, I'll let Brad introduce.
Sure. Well, as you know, for a number of months, probably longer than just a few, we've been hearing about PFAS and its impact in the environment. And there's been a growing interest from this board to hear more about what that is, is there a role for the board in addressing that, and just kind of gain a little bit more information. BAR has been heavily involved with helping clients with these emerging contaminants for many years across the country, even in other parts of the world. So we thought we'd bring a couple of our experts here just to kind of share, just some, high level information about PFAS and maybe some specifics to how, some of the things in the area of the watershed and things that we might consider going forward. So Nick Belgiel is leading our initiative at BAR on PFAS and kind of helping connect us with clients all over and help them. And of course, many of you have met Evan Christensen, our groundwater specialist. Really understands not only groundwater in general, but you've heard from him on the specifics of how groundwater moves through the district too. And at this point, the attention has really been on PFAS in drinking water and in groundwater sources. So Evan might be able to complement next presentation tonight, but thanks for having these guys and they're the experts, so ask them the questions.
Just as a thought, the groundwater talk was, one of my favorites in 30 years. And now that we're getting new board members and we might not have seen that, it might be worth a revisit.
Let me know. I'd be happy to
Yeah.
dig that up and refresh it for another group.
If you lost your report, I still have.
Shocker.
The other quick comment is they did have an interesting article in the Star Tribune this morning about technologies for getting rid of PFAS in all kinds of media, which I found kind of interesting as to the ways that you could do it. Basically, the bottom line was there's going to be a lot of money.
Well, I can get the PFAS out of our bodies and out of the fish.
Yeah,
And I'll touch on a little bit of that.
okay.
So yes, thank you again. I'm Nick Palaciello, our PFAS market lead. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The agenda that I'll go through tonight is a quick overview of PFAS, what it is as background for, am I still
No,
sharing?
Did I do that? I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button.
There
I
we
was
go.
just gonna
Okay.
minimize the.
So overview of PFAS, just for background for everyone, if you're not familiar, the developing science on PFAS in human health and the environment, regulatory landscape, what actions are being taken both at the federal and state level, potential sources of PFAS in and around the watershed, the emerging remediation and treatment technologies, as Larry was just mentioning, and finally consideration for you for planning and funding as you consider PFAS in the watershed. So as Brad said, I lead our PFAS effort. And BAR has not only been serving the watershed for many years, but I'm also representing our team of engineers and scientists who have been addressing PFAS for more than 20 years. We first started with the multimedia fate and transport of PFAS for some of the original manufacturers of these materials. And as part of this, helped develop the first stack test methods for PFAS in the early 2000s. Since then, as you see some of our timeline, our team of expertise has grown. We are now a company of over 900 employees, over 700 of which have worked on PFAS projects in 25 states and numerous countries over the last several years. And as Brad said, so Evan is my technical side part at BAR. I'm our marketing regulatory person, so I've been following all the developments in the numerous states and the federal level for the last several years. So what are PFAS? PFAS are man-made chemicals used in industry and consumer products since the 1950s. They stand for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS is the family of compounds, of which there are more than 4,000, somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 compounds. Because of the carbon-fluorine bond, they're among the strongest in chemistry. And then much of the attention by EPA and the state of Minnesota and other states has been around PFOA and PFOS. These are 8-chain or long-chain compounds. They were phased out of production in the US in the early 2010s. However, you will hear about replacement chemicals such as Gen X, 6 and 4-chain PFAS compounds, or sometimes called the short chain. These compounds have names such as PFHXS, which is a degradation product that PFHXS is used in firefighting foam, and then PFHXA, which is a degradation product of the former. These shorter chain or replacement chemistries are part of the growing list of PFAS in the PFAS family, which are getting attention both by EPA and the state of Minnesota in sampling and monitoring plans. So they were developed because they are heat, oil, stain, and water resistant. Because of that carbon-fluorine bond that I mentioned, they do not degrade in the environment. They are destroyed at high temperatures. They're semi-volatile. They're very miscible in water, and they have some affinity for organic carbon, which I'll get into a little bit later. So with these properties, PFAS have been used in consumer products, like I said, since the 50s, and everything from ski wax to non-stick cookware, waterproof clothing, to more industrial applications such as firefighting foam, also known as AFFF, and in manufacturing processes in coatings, waterproofing, and to reduce surface tension. So again, while the production of PFOA and PFOS has been phased out in the United States, there are replacement chemicals that are still being manufactured. Additionally, the chemicals are used in many mixtures, and because of this, they're ubiquitous in many of the manufacturing processes still. So we know that they've been used for, but what are some of the downfalls? So PFAS has been linked to multiple malices, including kidney, testicular, cancer, thyroid disease, and high cholesterol. As I said before, they don't break down in the environment. And right now, studies have said the half-life for PFOA in humans is 4 years. The half-life for PFOS is 5 years, approximately, in humans. The health risks, which I covered. And then there's growing research on the uptake of PFAS, mainly PFOS, in fish and wildlife. Just this month, NPCA designated certain Minnesota waters impaired for fish consumption, and this includes the Mississippi River Pool 2 at the south edge of the watershed. So these health effects continue to be studied, and to understand what levels they impact human health. This is a sense of the timeline of the development around PFAS. So in 2016, the US EPA issued a health advisory limit, or HAL, of 70 parts per trillion, guided by studies that pointed to bioaccumulation in humans and wildlife. And that's at the drinking water level. So all these that I'm talking about is at the drinking water level. In June of last year, EPA issued interim updated drinking water health advisories for PFOA, PFOS, and some of the replacement chemicals. These interim levels are significantly lower than the 2016 numbers, at 4 parts per quadrillion for PFOA and 20 parts per quadrillion for PFOS. To give you some relative scale, one of our colleagues helped us with this. That's 2.5 minutes of the total elapsed time of planet Earth, or 1 millimeter of the total distance of the sun. So we're talking about very, very small levels. The Minnesota Department of Health has interim health-based values of 15 parts per trillion for PFOS and 35 parts per trillion for PFOA, and health values for several other PFAS compounds. Again, these are for drinking water. So what's been going on? Yes, go ahead.
Is it, so sometimes people set limits as aspirational versus something achievable. Is that an aspirational limit, or is that something that we believe is being met by drinking water in 2000?
It's, I would say it's aspirational. So testing methods can get down to the relatively 4 parts per trillion level. So it's a little bit,
So
it's
we can't even measure currently.
correct. Yes, so it is aspirational.
Yeah, and I guess to expand on it a little bit more, the EPA is working on establishing, they call MCLs in drinking water. And a subcomponent of that is MCLGs, which stand for MCL goals. And it's very likely that the goal is that low, but what's actually achievable will be something higher, and that's where the MCL will come out at.
So I'll start with the federal level. The EPA issued a PFAS strategic roadmap in 2021 by the Biden administration. This followed the PFAS Action Act, which was developed under the Trump administration. So this is a topic that is bipartisan and is not necessarily new at the federal level. Under the roadmap, there's a few factors that are very similar to Minnesota's plan, which I'll get into in many other states. First, that sources are in focus. And while the PFAS roadmap outlines multiple priorities, the agency's intended focus is PFAS sources. So we're talking about point sources. This includes PFAS prevention, life cycle considerations, release accountability, and historic and ongoing release tracking. The build out of regulatory framework. EPA is trying to use existing regulatory mechanisms and environmental authorities used to address PFAS contamination. This includes the alphabet soup of different regulations, including RECRA, CERCLA, TSCA, and NPDES permitting. I can get into more definition, but just know that it's basically soil, air, waste permitting at the federal level. And while formal regulation is in development, the roadmap shows the EPA's intention to increase reporting and compliance. They are multimedia focused. While ground, surface water, and especially drinking water have been the primary media, they are looking at soil and air as well through the federal plan. And then they are also looking at the impact of disadvantaged communities. The roadmap incorporates broader environmental justice implications for potential and contributing PFAS sources. The Minnesota Blueprint, which came out in 2021, very similar here in the state. There's an emphasis on sampling, addressing historical contamination, and they are focusing on certain industries that are known to have manufactured or used PFAS in the past. The key aspects of the plan, very similar to the EPA, prevent PFAS pollution wherever possible, at the point source primarily at this time, to manage PFAS pollution, and when not feasible, address it where it already has occurred, and to clean up PFAS pollution at contaminated sites. So with a little bit of that background, some considerations for sources in and around the watershed. So as part of the blueprint, the NPCA released their PFAS monitoring plan last year. There are over 100 specific facilities that have been called out by NPCA, which will be required to report on PFAS in air, water, and waste. Now I say required, but this is framed as a voluntary program, but NPCA in their documentation has said that they will move to make it involuntary if need be. This includes testing media that is considered to be the most significant vector. Again, air, wastewater, drinking water, storm water. By now, facilities have been identified and they have received letters from the NPCA, and most facilities will start testing this year in 2023. And more context as we get into the next part here.
Are there any sub items for other government groups, like grants to help integrate testing? Is that something you'll cover later?
This is focused on industry at this point as the point source producer. So at this point there's not a grant program to go into other areas. They're really just looking at industry who produced, and they're required to basically sample under their own doc.
Okay, so I apologize. The reason I'm asking is I was curious, since we are out there doing water quality measurements today, is there anything that could help bolster, make that part of the agenda? And then the other question on made me start thinking, if the half-life in humans is 4 to 5 years, what's it to a fish?
Still being tested. Okay, that's the short answer. We'll get into the sampling in a moment, because I think this part will lead into that. The fate and transport. This is kind of a life cycle of PFAS. So you have the use of AFFF, the firefighting foam. You have primary manufacturers. You have secondary manufacturers. You have landfills, water treatment facilities, and biosolids, which are all vectors or contributors of PFAS. PFAS moves in the air. Evan is one of the foremost experts in the fate and transport between air, surface, and groundwater. And we've seen that it does travel distances. It's part of the reason that you find PFAS in polar bears in the Arctic. You're finding PFAS in rainwater. It just moves through different vectors. So as we look at the watershed, and the watershed here, as you know, is outlined in the dark black lines. There are known PFAS sites, which are the squares. And those are facilities that have been identified by the NPCA and are currently addressing PFAS. There are the triangles, which are the facilities that are named in the monitoring plan that I just mentioned. And if you see, the dotted line is the 10-mile radius buffer from the watershed. So when I just talked about the fate and transport, is there are current facilities that are addressing PFAS now. There are potential, and I will call them potential sources in the future, but there may be additional contributors that are outside the jurisdiction of the watershed that may be contributing to PFAS in the watershed now or currently. Which we'll go back to at some point Evan's presentation, but these are groundwater plumes, not necessarily PFAS, though that there is some overlap, but this is the plumes of contamination identified by the NPCA in and around the watershed.
I have a question. I've got a whole series on my list here, but one that comes, so like I remember Oakdale site, they were picking up all these barrels and they were leaking and they were moving them. And then they were sucking up groundwater and squirting it into the air so sunlight would help do something. But sounds like that would be a bad thing to do for PFAS, because then you're just throwing it into the air. Is that right?
So at the time at that facility, they were pumping, it was prior to knowing about PFAS. And the pumping was going through an air stripper to volatilize the VOC contamination, which is also present there. And now they treat that air differently than they did back then.
So I would say as the science has grown, we're learning, addressing it. So the focus, and maybe reference to the article Larry saw in the paper today, a lot of the focus has been on drinking water, on groundwater. We're just starting to get to surface water now. You know, I look at the 20 years that our company has been working on PFAS. We're just now starting to address surface water with our clients, and there's a lot of questions. You know, the transport with and around dissolved versus particulate matter in surface water, the contact and transport time, what runoff events and sediment transport, how PFAS interacts in those scenarios is just starting to be understood at this time. So considerations for surface water and groundwater, source reduction or elimination is the primary mechanism at this time to remove PFAS. The other part of my world is on the utility industry. So the correlation I make is if you look at the reduction of greenhouse gases, where they go first, they went with coal-fired facilities to reduce greenhouse gas, kind of the same principle. Let's go to the source or a major contributor and start reducing there. There are still going to be other sources. There are emerging technologies to treat PFAS, which I'm going to get into in a moment. And there's ongoing testing and monitoring going on, not only in the state, but the federal government has started testing at public water facilities that'll start this year in 2023 and go through 2025. And they're focused again on drinking water for that testing. To get to your your question, testing is complex. It is not your run-of-the-mill water sampling. We have seen contaminations in samples because of the pens used, because the samplers have eaten fast food and the wrappers have PFAS on it, so that contaminates the sample. It's a very complex sampling method and operating procedures you have to go through. In addition, it's two times the expense to run samples in labs, and I will tell you right now, the labs are backed up. It's kind of crazy. So it's one of those things that I think a consideration, but you have to also think of your protocol as not only the protocol of sample, but where are you going to sample? What are you going to do with the data when you have it? And you know, there's an expense to it. So I'll touch on the remediation, treatment, and technologies. The focus again has been on drinking water. The primary technologies right now are granular activated carbon. As I said before, there's some affinity to carbon. What we've seen is PFAS does stick to granular activated carbon, or GAC, and also a technique called ion exchange. The challenge with PFAS is there's a lot of systems, water treatment systems and otherwise, that use GAC currently to address iron and manganese and other constituents. What happens is you have to pre-treat for those constituents first. And then what I consider, my wastewater engineers may not like it, but I call it a polish. You have to address the iron and manganese, otherwise the PFAS just passes through or gets knocked off by the iron and manganese. So it's a more complicated treatment process to address PFAS specifically. From that article, GAC and ion exchange, as I said, is the known technology. Again, it's mostly applied to drinking water. People want certainty that it's out of drinking water. And there is a number of different technologies currently being evaluated. BAR is currently working with the NPCA, will be publishing a study later this year for PFAS treatment in a number of media, drinking water, wastewater, landfill leachate. But as I list those off, surface water is still emerging. The article today, what the NPCA has done is they have purchased a foam fractionation unit, which is an emerging technology that basically runs water through it and foams, and the PFAS is condensed into a foam, and then you go and dispose of the foam in a different way. So that's one. We are currently working on capture and divert stormwater. So you capture the stormwater and you treat it that way, or storage and treatment. So these, again, are emerging options to be able to treat PFAS in surface water.
Nick or Evan, contact time with activated carbon, is that, we have some different systems in the district. I think of the permeable line barrier where, the water flows through, you remove the phosphorus as they flow through, but, what kind of contact time are we talking? Give us an idea.
I mean, it's definitely a consideration, and I'm not gonna be able to give you a straight answer because it does depend on the volume and the concentration in the water itself. But it's on the order of minutes to tens of minutes. Yeah.
Oh, you mean, so my fridge filter is not good enough?
Well, that's designed differently. Yeah, and that has a smaller flow rate and a much lower concentration stream coming in. And so oftentimes those types of filters are effective, particularly the ones at the sink. And they're used as part of a remediation strategy on various sites that we work on, where preferably if you have a private well that's impacted, you'd have a larger granulated activated carbon system for your whole house installed. But if that's not feasible, those they call them POUTS, point of use treatment systems, would be effective and used.
So I'll address who's responsible to address PFAS first. Again, US EPA is taking a look nationally. As Evan said, we expect the release of MCL's maximum contamination limits in March of this year. And they're really active in the regulatory framework using the Clean Drinking Water Act, Surface Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the alphabet soup of regulations under those. NPCA is taking action under the full extent of PFAS in Minnesota and can set state regulatory framework. And then the Minnesota Department of Health sets the drinking water standards. Yesterday, the Minnesota DNR and NPCA announced the formation of the Priority 2 work group as part of the 3M settlement. This will be allocating $20 million in grant money, and the money will be used to compensate for losses to recreational and ecological resources. So I think this is a consideration for this board in two ways. There will be two subgroups as a part of these the work grouping grants. One is the resident work group, where they will provide feedback on Priority 2 goals and planning processes to DNR and NPCA. The work group membership is open to residents of Ramsey-Washington and Dakota counties, and the application deadline for that is February 21st. And then there will be a government subgroup, which is looking at ecosystem services and recreation. And this will be an invitation from the DNR and NPCA to local resource managers, communities, and non-governmental organizations to serve as on this technical group in order to gain insights into local planning relevant to Priority 2. I emailed this to Tina last night and today, but I would assume that DNR would be reaching out to this group, but I'm not going to make any real assumptions. So it might be something to connect with or talk to NPCA or DNR more about. The difference between the Priority 1 and Priority 2 group is Priority 1 group really did look at remediation. This one is looking at restoration, enhancing aquatic resources, wildlife, habitat, fishing, resource improvement, and outdoor recreation in the East Metro and downstream areas of the Mississippi and St. Croix rivers.
Do you know what the gaps are on the grants within?
No, they didn't spell that out. Again, this was, I was joking with Evan that every time I kind of went back to the webpage today, there was a little bit more information, but I think it's still being developed as to those caps.
Knowing what you do you have some examples of the kinds of projects people might apply for money for to do the restoration?
I think this one's a little different. This one is, if you have an impact area, say it's the pool 2 area that was designated for impaired fish waters, it could be putting a fishing pier in an area that isn't impacted so that people still have access, is an example. Again, not a lot of clarity, but that's my best guess for
That's
right
something the work groups will try to define,
Yeah.
better define.
Exactly.
I have a related kind of question. Okay, is removing fish a way of decontaminating because it bioaccumulates and then it's all accumulated in the fish, remove them, start removing it from the system?
I think I would say this is analogous to mercury, right? So there's been mercury accumulation. So science is probably not there. I wouldn't say that removing the fish necessarily removes. the
Perhaps
issue.
that could be an experiment that's explored with one of those grants.
It might be. Maybe.
Yeah. The $20 million they set aside, is that for the operation of these groups or for them to issue grants?
For the grants, $20 million in grants.
$180 million pot of gold that they have to work with. $20 million isn't much.
So this is because
I read the article.
Yeah.
in the paper.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, the bigger chunk is for the priority 2 for the remediation.
For the drinking water.
Yep, the main goal was implementing drinking water treatment first.
Right.
And they set aside the $20 million right off the bat. They had this full settlement funds, $20 million went to this priority 2. The rest went to priority 1 for drinking water treatment. And a little bit of some studies for remediation, if you're familiar with the stuff they're looking at in the Valley Branch Watershed District. But they went through the priority 1 process, which involved a big public and private kind of work group session, and they have a big plan to decide how to do treatment. And they're starting to implement that now, and now they're getting to the priority 2 where the 20 million was previously set aside. The plan has always been that if there's money left over, it could be reallocated to priority 2, but from what we're hearing, they're anticipating that there might not be any or very little to carry over.
Because I used to go to the East Metro groundwater meetings. Till they went online and I sort of lost interest. Basically, they were saying the same thing every time we went, so.
Yeah.
So then there is potential other resources through the infrastructure investment and jobs act, the IIJA. There's specific funding through the state revolving funds to address PFAS, specifically related to surface water. There was $5 billion to address emerging contaminants for small disadvantaged communities. And then there's $1 billion for wastewater and stormwater infrastructure projects under the Clean Water Act and state revolving funds. So I think of grants or that may be something. There is some language in the governor's budget to include infrastructure money to address PFAS. Though I was really trying to dig in to find specifics and I couldn't find anything. And so it'll probably need the legislature in their budget to address that. The MPCA also has some of their grants, such as the surface water assessment grants, which may be available to address PFAS.
What about like LCCMR grants?
I don't know of any that have specifically focused on PFAS. I'm not saying that's not something that could come up in the future, but I'm not aware of any right now or in the past.
So as a conclusion for the board, I think it's important to note that a lot of attention is being paid to PFAS. Obviously, you are all acutely aware of it, but it is happening both at the federal and state level from a regulatory standpoint. And it's not a topic that's going away. The full extent of PFAS in the environment in Minnesota is still developing. And the science and engineering to address it, especially in surface water, is still emerging. And as we get further down the road addressing PFAS in drinking water and wastewater, there's going to be significant effort yet to address it in surface water and stormwater. So Val, I go back to your question. I think it's definitely following what's happening from the science side and the regulatory side. This is probably a topic that's very analogous to mercury and chlorides in the development process. It's still early stages, but things that you all probably have as questions or will be getting questions. So with that, I will take questions. And Evan.
It's hard to gauge how it's problematic, how big of a problem, because we lack the measurement tools and infrastructure to do that. Gives me pause. That's all. That was a statement. I don't. It's like, I mean, is there plans to expand facilities for measuring, or obviously there's investments for capability. I heard that loud and clear, but out of curiosity.
I think that's a question for the NPCA. And I'll be honest, we went back and forth of trying to identify the right person at NPCA. I think it's something we can work with Tina on, but you know, they've got different groups that are looking at different aspects of this. So in the timeline we had, we're struggling to find it, but I think that's a question for NPCA. But I would say that right now, based on our knowledge, it's really about the sources, the point sources, and getting a handle of that.
I think like Nick mentioned earlier, like being analogous to mercury and also the chloride issues. So, you know, chloride is an emerging contaminant of concern, and the PCA took the lead and said, okay, we need some partners. And so at some point we partnered with them to do some early monitoring that hadn't been done before. So I could see, and they had funding for that to be able to do that. So I could see kind of going down that road if they're looking for people that want to help support their decisions on how to expand the monitoring and treatment of it. But it, like with chloride and with mercury, it's looked at from a statewide level because it's not,
Right.
you know, specific just to our watershed.
So in your opinion, is there any role for the watershed district in this at this point, except for to keep up to date on what's going on? That was kind of Pam's original question, was, is there some niche or the way that the watershed district could help, or to, I probably should put words in your mouth, you can put the words in your mouth, but or is there a role for us in this, or is there not? Do we have enough players that we already have a full baseball team, or what?
It's a really good question. I think this priority 2 group might be a good way to engage, because there are obviously known impacted areas within the watershed or around the watershed, and trying to help habitat, help access to areas that aren't as impacted. It's probably a role.
What about just doing research to identify the levels of PFAS in the fish in our lakes?
It's something, in my opinion, that we've been advising our clients, even in the industrial side. The goalposts keep moving, so it's hard to give a direct answer to that because the goalposts are going to continue to move, right? The MCL that's released is going to be a new goalpost when, you know, when they get to a surface water decision or standard there, your goalposts are going to move. And if you were looking at surface water now, you don't know what you're aiming at. So
Even if it was just discovery, what's there?
with discovery is what does that mean? You know, and it's a little bit of answering the question of, okay, I have this data, but what am I going to do with it? And you'll have a lot of questions with it, because if it comes down high or low, especially if there's not a standard to aim at, you might have more questions to address. And again, without real treatment options right now, you're kind of stuck with, well, we know what we have, but we can't really do much about it. And you may also have other contributors from outside of the watershed, like I said.
Might just.
I know that's a really unsatisfying answer, but it's.
No problem.
It might just be too soon to
Yeah.
say that that's a worthwhile exercise.
Well, one thing we could do right now is take that PowerPoint and put it on our website and provide information to anybody who wanted it.
Yeah, I was gonna tell you that. I did not email it to them ahead of time. I just got it yesterday, but I will put it on our website, and as well as a link to the
See Alan one on the website?
presentation. I don't know if it got
It
put
was in the
separate.
board packet.
Yeah, it wasn't.
I know.
I had
I
searched.
got it, but I can never find anything. Well, I can, because I keep all of the agendas, so I can go and find things.
Yeah.
But anyway,
know.
it doesn't keep agendas
Yeah.
like I do. These are all the agendas for the past 5 years.
Yeah, we can make sure it's on there.
Yeah, and I just like searched the library for the word PFAS and just
No,
board
there's-
minutes came up. That was it.
Yeah.
No information to help me understand it.
That's
Nor was there any reference to groundwater, I might add, to teach me anything about groundwater. So a nice presentation that we might put on there that could perhaps be beneficial. Okay, so I have like,
I was gonna follow up on this, just one other thing, just to know is, what might be helpful is knowing that Bidet, Makaska, Mississippi Pool Two, and large portions of Valley Ranch Watershed District have surface waters that have been listed impaired due to PFAS. And I don't know how much you're able to communicate with the other boards or people involved in those, but just understanding how they've reacted or what they've been able to do with that knowledge might be helpful as well.
a good idea.
Define impaired then, because I was trying to.
Yeah, I don't know. MPCA kind of comes up with that.
What's going through my head is a lot of waters that we have flow to the Mississippi. And I don't know if there's anything concerning with the place south tip of our watershed in Mississippi being, yes.
Are they requiring those watersheds for cities to do individual TMDLs, or is it?
I don't think so yet, but I could see something like that in the future. I think at this point it's more along fish consumption advisories, things like that.
So, okay, I have a bunch of questions. So one, are there bacteria that can degrade PFAS?
There is some evidence that that can happen. They see it a little bit in some wastewater treatment facilities. But it's very slow and kind of an emerging research and not really well understood.
Well, I know this guy, Mike Sadowski, that's what he does for a living, is he makes he'll take the contaminant and then he'll just find bacteria who will evolve to
Yep.
degrade it. That would be awesome.
It's a very common approach for other contaminants,
Mhm.
particularly use it in situ in groundwater and in wastewater treatment facilities. And hopefully that research will grow and be applicable for PFAS, but right now there's definitely no commercial application of it.
Yeah, and are the, is there any known, so we're starting to understand some health impacts of the PFAS is the big ones. Do we know anything about the smaller ones, their health impacts, or has research ever even been done? One of my biggest concerns about these things is these companies can make these brand new chemicals and, flood the planet with them, and we can bioaccumulate them all and nobody ever does any research to see if they're safe. So that's why I'm wondering if that now they've deemed these unsafe, so they've made these new ones that they're using to serve the same purpose, but are they safe?
Science is, they're just starting to do the toxicology on the
Wouldn't you think you'd have to do that first before you, but anyways, okay, that's my own personal pet peeve. I was wondering, do we know the PFAS levels of fish or wildlife or the water in our watershed district?
See? It's probably a question for NPCA, because they've done the sampling in pool 2, and that's where they're coming up with the fish advisory levels. And because they've done the testing in fish, but I don't know if your other bodies of water within the watershed.
And you said pool 2 is like a part of the Mississippi River by
Yeah,
Big
so-
Zone?
Yes,
Yeah, pool 2 is between the dam at Hastings and St. Anthony Falls.
Is that, I don't know if that qualifies as like an action or something for us to reach out to PCA or the staff, if that's something y'all can do.
Yeah, that would be a follow-up for sure.
Okay, so are you ready for my next few?
yeah, just, if you don't mind, now there is, let me go back to, I do have a link in here to the PCA website on their water quality criteria and where they've listed the accumulation and they have some shading for what is impaired in those levels. So that's enough.
Well, that'd be
Just
good to have a link to that too, because I'd like to go
Yep,
look at it.
that's.
Yeah, we'll get to,
that's
And
enough.
like on the website too for other.
yeah, it'll be in the presentations.
Excellent. So, okay, the EPA is lowering the drinking water rate this last year. I'm just wondering, how does that affect our local drinking water? Will our local drinking water now become not drinkable? or in Oakdale where I live, maybe not up where you live, but definitely we're affected where I live.
Drinking water comes from different places. Ours
Yeah,
is deep below us. Some comes from Mississippi. Some,
I would say that's a question for the MPCA.
Okay. MPCA. Okay, how has PFAS in our groundwater changed over the last decade?
That's why I have him.
I mean, over the last decade, not a ton. What has changed is our ability to sample, detect, and delineate where it is in groundwater. And that knowledge base has grown a lot in the last 10 years. But there isn't a lot of evidence that it has significantly changed, both increasing or decreasing. There are some shifts, particularly in parts of southeastern Washington County. But as far as change over the last 10 years, I wouldn't say that's significant, but the growth in our understanding has grown a lot.
Okay. And so when you said that, it was curious to me that you need to polish the water first to get rid of the iron and some other metals. Otherwise it will knock off it's not PFAS off of that carbon filter. And that immediately made me wonder, where I live in Oakdale, our water is contaminated with PFAS, and the most contaminated well, 3M put a carbon filter, and that's what I drink. It's concerning to me. It's like, why didn't you give me the water from the uncontaminated? But then I'm wondering, do you happen to know if this water is polished first before it goes to get the PFAS removed?
So the point of entry systems that Evan was talking about, we have installed, and they do it. I mean, you do your own, pH levels and everything like that to make sure that it's.
No, I'm talking about the Oakdale
Yeah,
water
so-
palace.
Okay, so the city of Oakdale,
Mhm.
I don't know all the details, but I can tell you what I know is what Nick was referring to of polishing is infusing ion exchange for treatment. City of Oakdale has a treatment facility for all their municipal wells that uses granulated activated carbon. And so that doesn't have a polishing step. They might have some, but it's not as critical as Nick was referring to. So anyway, City of Oakdale has a granulated activated carbon system for their wells, and they monitor the influent and effluent of that.
Okay, so they know if it's working.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, but in that system, what you're talking about is if we had an iron rich water coming through that would knock off the PFAS,
Iron rich water is problematic for ion exchange
but
treatment.
not for the
Less
carbon.
of a
Less.
concern.
Less concerned, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think those are all my questions.
Excellent.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you.
Concerning.
Yes, never
It's-
walk away feeling great about
No.
it. But
No, I don't. I'll share a story. So this is how popularized this subject has been. There's obviously been feature films. I made the mistake of watching the Netflix documentary with my wife when she was 8 months pregnant with our second kid. It hasn't gone well in my career with PFAS. It held that over my head a lot. So it is scary, but it's to know that there are really smart people like Evan that are addressing this and trying to get their handle on it. It's happening. Any questions from those online?
Great presentation.
Yeah, just one quick thing. You said that there's a lot of work going on around the world on this, actually. So is there a good exchange of ideas?
Yeah, so the SAP system is actually from Australia. So yes, there is exchange at the international level. In fact, Australia started to address PFAS before we did. And we've rapidly caught up. But yes, there's exchange of ideas and technologies. And that was part of the reason that NPCA didn't get that system until December, because of supply chain issues and shipping and all the logistics of the world.
Have you, either of you ever had your own personal PFAS levels measured?
I have not. I do know my drinking water from my city. But in my blood.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you
Thanks
guys.
for the presentation.
Forward to reading it again on the website.
Yeah. Yes, and we'll follow up with the PCA and
Yeah, that would
that
be good if we
information.
could find somebody that wants to be on that
Yeah.
committee, just to find out what they're doing.
yeah, we'll definitely have a watershed representative on that.
Okay.
Phase 2 as well.
I would love if we thought of some creative grants to explore PFAS in our watershed district and how to mitigate it or understand it or remove it.
Yeah, we'll definitely be engaged in that. I can be giving updates on that as well. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
move on to 11B. South Florida MWD evaluation of flood control options and resiliency study for the Battle Creek and Fish Creek drainage areas.
You know, it's not as short as the Beltline resiliency study. We'll just have to come with a new name for that.
Similar type study, just smaller scale, different part of the district, so. Not sure if you had any specific questions about what is in here, but. Or you, I think, that you probably weren't around for the big chunk of the actual resiliency study for the Beltline, but, others are, I think, quite familiar with what was done, the analysis that was conducted. We'll look for ways to optimize the system we have and add to it where we need to, or at least make those recommendations. And of course, as we look at these things, we always weigh the benefit and with the cost as we go through, because there may be situations where, you know, we can lower the flood level, but it comes at an extreme cost that may not be appropriate for us to pursue, but at least then we know what it would take to deal with it.
It's good, because like I said, it sort of fills out everything.
Yeah.
It's the little areas that aren't included, we can understand what those are and see what the priorities are. That's good from that point of view.
You open up for questions.
Yep.
I was just, I couldn't find Snake Lake when I Google mapped it, and I apologize, I looked
Snake
around.
Creek.
Snake Creek.
Snake Creek, yeah, forgive me, I just don't. Could you?
Yeah, it's not real clear. It's the very southern part of the district, essentially an outflow of Bailey Nursery. So is it
Okay.
Bailey Road? It's just north of there, but it is.
Very far south. It's like this, about as far south as you can get in.
Yeah. So when we talk about the double driveway,
Yeah,
it's south of there, but it's just north of the system that is. Or it's just north of Bailey Road.
yeah, it looks like you're moving your way south
Yes.
as with phase A and B, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And there's no need for Eagle Lake or Pig Eye Lake or any of those to be looked at as part of this, out of curiosity.
Well, they're part of the river backflow floodplain area, so
So
they're different, treated
Okay.
differently. But, I mean, they're certainly built into the model and that will
Yeah.
be part of the determination.
so it's more of like they're in the analysis, but really these are the focal areas in terms of the.
Right. And again, as you recall from the Beltline study, we're looking at those homes that we've
Yeah.
identified that are in kind of working from those, but yes, that's a part of the modeling, but the emphasis would be upstream.
Okay, good.
So proposed CIP projects maybe 2024 out of this study, I think.
Yeah, I think from a concept standpoint, it wouldn't be most likely moving right into design. You know, if you recall the process, we looked at this holistically. We found conceptual solutions that may be appropriate, tried to prioritize those, and then did necessary feasibility studies to actually understand what is the cost.
Yeah, and taking into account all the new stuff that's been done on the upper levels.
Right.
Yeah, right, so we'll be kind of reprioritizing as
Right.
well, so adding them this information, and looking at.
That's what I can see making a big difference.
You know, as we go through the Beltline, look at things. Stuff that was critical is not so critical anymore, so there may be other places to devote resources. attention.
Right,
So.
Right.
for that. Is there anything we need to do with this? Is it in the budget? You're doing it.
no, it's in the budget. I think like last month, you gave motion of support
Yeah,
to proceed as written in the scope. So if you'd like to do that, you could.
okay, good. So I have a.
Can I ask
Sure.
just one more question? So I can't recall, Brad, you guys bring these back periodically. Is there like a specific task that makes more sense to come back and do like a brief update presentation? I can't remember which task it best aligned to.
Right.
Like I was wondering, like, is task, it doesn't make sense for maybe task 1 or task 3, or I'm just curious if that would help stay engaged in it, I guess, because it's a fairly lengthy process.
So it's a lengthy process, and I think as the schedule lays out, you're trying to get it completed in 2023, but I think an appropriate time to come back would be during that June timeframe as we start thinking about 2024 budget items, because we will start to see some of those concepts emerge in the modeling that's done at that point. And then we can start to consider, well, do we need to allocate, a bigger chunk than normal to a certain number of feasibility studies, or are we still on track with kind of the normal budget items we have there?
To
I
that
would say
point,
that May-June timeframe would be.
and we've talked about this before, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea since you have deadlines in here. It's just in the board packet say, are we on target or are we not on target? You don't have to tell us what you're doing, because we can read that and figure it out. I like the idea of coming back in June because of the planning that's going to take place with 2023. But at least for me, I know that what we've said before is that you share it with staff. And it'd just be a simple matter to share it with the board.
Well, I think that is in that link. So at the very top of the project status report, there's that link to projects. And I think that spreadsheet, the tracking spreadsheet is part of that, but I'll make sure. So remember Brandon had put together that tracking spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that that's included in that link. so
Well,
that
and in truth, I don't know if I've ever tried to click it. Oh, I haven't clicked it recently. I'll put it that way. So
it'll always be at the top of the PSR report as a link for you to, and that shows all the projects that Bar has been working on that month and then, well.
Oh,
that
yes.
year.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, just to show the board support, do I have a motion to support the project work plan?
I will move to support the project work plan as presented.
Second.
Okay, no further discussion? Okay, roll call.
Pam, I, Val.
Aye.
Lance,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, moving on. We're on the administrator's report.
Yeah, so I have my meetings for the month as well as upcoming meetings. I've included the CAC and I still have mod on here, but you know what I mean? Metro watershed meetings, including the legislative days. I have that just going through July, and just a reminder that we moved that July board meeting to the June 28th date.
Out of curiosity, and especially thinking about new board members and whatnot, are there months that we should start just mentally planning for tours preemptively?
Okay, yeah. You mean the little like before board meeting
Yeah,
tours, like the mini
that,
the
or
mini
the mini
tours?
tour, like just the, I mean, we're going really south with that feasibility study, and honestly, I just don't spend a lot of time
Yeah.
there, so I don't.
Sure. Yeah, I'll work with bar staff, Brad and bar staff to kind of map out what that could look like, where we could go and the places we could visit. So you can see that.
It seems like little chunks at a time would be really helpful.
And one area that's very accessible, and it's maybe not that dramatic, but at least the outlet from Tanner's Lake, and so you can start to kind of envision the system, because a lot of the flooding issues are in and around Tanner's Lake sub-watershed, and with the additional pipe that's going through 94, you can kind of get a feel for how that system works. So, and that's right off the road.
Might be under active construction with the gold line.
Right.
Just go
We'll figure
drive
it
by.
out.
and-
Yeah. Yeah.
One of your special magnets on the car.
Sure. Step back, Brad.
So in here on the West Fadness boundary change,
Yeah.
you said no update, although we were supposed to have it done at the end of January.
Yeah,
So what is the story?
I'm waiting for Bowser to complete their end of the deal
Oh, okay.
on that, so.
Good for Bowser. It sounds
Is
like
that
a
just
dog
pro
story
forma? There's no problem.
No, there's no problem,
this time.
just time.
Okay.
Yes, and the other two items, I don't know where the days go, but those two are coming. The governance document is nearing completion, and manager Val here had asked to be wanted to be part of that, so I'll get that to him in the next.
Love me some role clarity, man.
Yeah, clarify those roles, and then along with, I mean, that governance document has a lot more than just roles. It's got a lot of other documents included, so stuff included, but that is coming.
I wanted to, I had a similar question on the land acquisition and
Yeah.
use policies. That's just a time thing. There's not like a,
Right, no, there's no problem. It's just me devoting the time to it.
and on the West Fadness Lake, the one question to follow up with Larry's is that gonna come in time for our budgetary discussions? Because I
Yeah.
believe there's been conversations on, there's work. that's-
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we come to the ceremony when we take it?
Sure, for the ribbon cutting.
No, you have to,
Champagne.
you have to extract the carbon.
No,
Yeah.
That's.
what I was.
Oh, there you
Not a
go.
ribbon cutting, but pull out a
Pull out a
fur.
There's not a lot of carp actually in West Fadness.
I thought
Weirdly.
there was.
There was, they actually found not as much that was
They did a
impacting water
study, like,
quality.
Oh, here, Bill had me convinced if we just got the.
Not
curb
as
cut.
much.
Even too.
Originally, wasn't as much, but we are still managing
That's
that
what
whole
carp is.
system.
You also had a lot of information in here from Maud.
Yeah.
Days.
Yeah, so the annual meeting reminder, just real quickly, is for next month. And I put in, we'll do election of officers is especially important this year because we have some changes on the board, so that I wanted to include those for your consideration before next month. And then, yes, I included some Minnesota watersheds update information about the legislative event. And what was the other thing? Oh, we do need so they're holding a special meeting. So I don't know if anyone was planning to attend, we would need to have delegates from the watershed.
That's part of the 15th and 16th, right?
Yeah, yep. So that would be on the 15th, I think it's like a 3:30 or 3 o'clock meeting, special meeting, and that's to amend the bylaws to with the new name change. So it's, I wouldn't say it's critical, but if anybody was planning to attend, it's at 3:30 on Wednesday, the 15th. If anybody was planning to attend, you should designate them as delegates so that we would have representation there. And I mean, technically, if you're available and interested in attending, it's still within the time frame. Yeah. But it's not, it'll be a real quick meeting.
Yeah.
It's not, there's not much
I
to,
think a lot of the groundwork was laid
Yeah.
in Alexandria.
Yeah.
From a history standpoint, who would go if none of the board members could go? I assume.
yeah, I'll be there as a staff person, but I can't be a
You can't be a
delegate.
delegate.
Yeah.
It has to be
Yeah.
a board member.
So it has to be board, and they'll just take a majority vote of the delegates that are present, so it,
I mean, it's just a name change, so I
It's
can't
a name
imagine.
yeah. No, I don't anticipate there being
Well,
any.
this name change in the bylaws, a bunch of other stuff, legislative priority.
Right,
Well,
the
and so-
special meeting is just for the name change, though.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was gonna
That's
ask you.
fine, the delegate.
If it was about voting for this, it's a
No.
different.
That was,
story.
yeah, that is just informational, and they'll have presentations and agency updates during that meeting, but this special meeting is just for the name change. We'd also need to get you registered for the event too, if you were planning to. Yeah,
Mod is so much better than moi.
we can still call it mod. It's just-
Formerly known as.
Yeah, formerly known as, right? There was some discussion, just as a side, about why association isn't in the name, like Association of Watershed Districts. But that is not what came out of the strategic
That would be
plan.
good though, it'd
maybe.
be odd.
Yeah,
Or awa, yeah, or no,
I-
odd, yeah.
yeah, I wondered about that too, because kind of like drops it.
Yeah.
Say Minnesota watersheds.
Yeah.
Minnesota watersheds, what?
I know,
Minwa, there you go, Minwa.
Yeah. Whatever.
yeah,
As long as everybody's happy, that's all.
we all know what we mean, I guess, we do, I guess.
And their email exchanges have gone up what feels exponential.
Yeah, with their new executive director. Yes,
Okay, that brings us to item number 13, which
yes.
is project and program status reports.
Correct.
Any comments, questions, or I have one or two?
I got a couple.
Okay, go.
I was looking at the Coleman Creek flood risk reduction. And didn't we recently do an assessment for PCU pond in terms of diversions and assessments for flood risk? Or is that related to just this? I'm trying to remember. I remember a presentation
So
on it,
we started that work
but it paused through this.
and paused it to look at the potential for diverting a certain amount of flow away from that system. And depending on how much flow we could divert, if any, then we were going to continue on. So I think we're at a point where in the near future, you'll be giving a kind of a summary memo of kind of where that diversion project looks like it's headed. And then we will be adding more detail to the, you know, the PCU pond and that system downstream, looking for opportunities to provide more storage. So.
Well, and I was just curious because I was connecting it back to the Duncan type of the project permit that we just did. So if we're doing different diversions, I was curious if that had any influence, but I assume that would come as part of that.
That was part of it, but as Nicole was sharing, you know, one of the things that it triggered the need for a permit was, you know, that was in the floodplain.
Yeah.
And so we had to look at that. And so, and it wasn't filling of the floodplain, so in essence, it wasn't raising the flood level. So we weren't concerned about that piece of this particular permit.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going or?
Yeah.
Sure. On the.
So I wasn't reacting to you.
Here, give me this. The Coleman Creek Wakefield Division feasibility study, I just want to make sure that I'm clear in February bar, that memorandum that went to staff for review.
Yeah.
Because I.
We'll be more clear on that, I think.
It
What
was
goes to
just
staff
like-
and what goes to board, yeah.
When I looked at it, I was like, oh, February, and then I went back and said, no, wait.
Nope.
That's
That
why I
was
decided.
staff, yeah.
I'll let somebody else go.
Is that it or you have more?
I have a
You can
curiosity
keep
one.
going.
On the Bailey team, that one was new to me on the double driveway pond building study. Could you just, should we know that language or that, what the Bailey team is?
So that's the Bailey Nursery.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so Bailey team is just
They're the
the
ones
team
that
working with
clean
the,
it up,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I just like Bailey
All right.
team.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I had a bunch of questions on the non-native edibles. This one was a nice summary of the plants used. Which is what I had thought Larry's reference was earlier, in wanting to. It was, sorry. Well, because I was looking at that and what it sounds like to me is there are options for edibles, but they have to be non-native, or it's proposed that they could be non-native. And they need to be done in a way in which you want to encourage the beauty, but maybe not have foraging as the top, or at least that's how I internalized it. What's the next steps for that, or for this type
And
of?
the same thing with the Miyazaki rainforest. I'd like to request that those two, because Marcy did a nice job on both of them. That they be put separately on the website so they can be found and used. But the edible ones was really interesting to read. Sounded like it'd be a good idea, you know, better than just looking at the flowers.
Well, and I was
Be able
just,
to eat some.
yeah, well, and I was impressed by some of the, like, I wouldn't have thought about rhubarb. I've seen that grow up like
Right.
everywhere, and just thinking through, and there are some very nice smelling plants in that list, the non-native edibles, but. I was curious if you guys were considering a more thorough pros and cons for the non-native edibles versus,
Yeah, I think we'd work with Bill and then bar staff to, like you said, look at those pros and cons and then, look at where we could kind of pilot some of this.
No, and
Same with the
you
forest.
already do a lot of great signage.
yeah.
So there could be
Yeah.
some signage added for the edibles that are already present. As kind of an educational thing that this
It's
plant is
edible.
used for, or is eaten by, or, whatever. And I thought the point about the pathways and disturbances was good, but it's not a barrier. You could plant a lot of stuff along the paths.
Well, it sounds like there could be very specific programs
Right.
for, non-edible, edible. It's a good idea.
When you say edible, I think
I
hot.
know.
I apologize.
Yeah.
How should I say
We're
this?
gonna come up with-
Asparagus.
Again, it represents like the Miyazaki rainforest, it represents an option
Yeah,
that you could have when you're looking at,
it's cool.
instead of just always a rain garden, different kind of garden that may be more appropriate for the area you're putting it in.
You know what's, it's so funny you said that because I was thinking how many people would consider putting apples in a rain garden like structure if that
Right.
was something.
Yeah.
Because that's where my head went for my yard.
Apples.
Apples.
Apple,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
You can make a lot of that. I mean,
So
we got away
we
with.
can get those two reports up on the website separately. Because again, I know they're in the packets, but you gotta be able to find them in the packets. And although the search is pretty
Editor.
robust.
Yeah.
It
Better,
isn't
yeah.
bad at all.
Yeah.
But then you have to get the right terms, because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a technology report that was written about buffering stormwater when I was looking at the Hodgson Road thing. And I had a heck of a time finding it. I did find it, but because I couldn't get the right terms, because I couldn't remember what the terms were to find what I was looking for. So if they're up there and in a discoverable place, that would be a real help.
I would second that too, because every time I Google or I use the search engine to find anything, I just get board packets. And so I'm guessing that the term I'm looking for is in that board packet, but I'm really looking for information on groundwater or PFAS or edibles. And that's not very satisfactory to get to asparagus.
Well, that was kind of my experience, because I went and I found a board packet. And then I had to go, I figured out I had to go into the agenda and find it. But then I had to go all the way down to, 275 to find out where it was, which isn't a big deal. And then I found out that wasn't what I was looking for. So it's a longer process.
We're
than it
looking
should
for a good way to, it's like
we had a-
we can't dissect the board packets and put them all, put it all out there, but I think presentations, things like
Yeah,
this,
stuff
there's
like that.
different
Presentations
things.
could just be in the same groupings.
No,
that we
yeah,
have
that's what I'm
the
saying.
project.
Presentation, fine. We used to
Yeah.
be actually better about getting those presentations up separately, so.
It also will reflect on the work that's been accomplished.
And I recall at the start of the website discussion that this was like a step one and there's ongoing maintenance plan.
Of course,
Right.
yeah, always.
And I was just curious, maybe there's like what we would call backlog for it going, if we could see it.
A backlog for changes and.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask Lauren how she tracks that, but. I'm sure
However she does, but like
Yeah.
just an update on like, here's some things that would be nice. Yeah, I sent her a link on, because I was looking for financials just to refresh before the board, and I searched and they came up and the links weren't clickable, but then Tina knew exactly where they were, which was very nice. It's very handy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure. I couldn't replicate what you did,
Really?
so I don't
Maybe
know.
it was the browser. I could tell you, I tried on two.
I couldn't
The
replicate.
link
it.
you sent me
Okay.
worked. I was like,
Good.
Okay, and the only other comment I had was in V, The CARP program recap was great. They had an article in Sunday's paper about, it was about Asian carp, but it talked a lot about the technologies used to find and kill the carp, to be very honest about it. So that may be a topic again that you would look at putting on a future agenda. To have Bill update us on.
Yeah.
What's going on with that, with our own little carps here, not the jumping kind.
Yeah, the full status report.
All right.
Hey, Bill.
Got it.
Okay, anybody got anything else?
We can call it the Larry culprit watch. Or
There you
culprit
go.
alert.
There you go.
Yeah, we used to have the Johnson Pond and now we have the Larry Culver.
Here we go. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Okay, we're done.
Done.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Larry and Diane, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's been great. We'll still be around.
Working with you.
Don't worry, we'll come in as
See you around.
visitors.
That'd be very nice.